Let's take a real quick check here of our 60-minute poll before we talk to EconCat88. The question I asked yesterday, and we'll leave it up until 6 o'clock tonight. What should Toledo do about blight? A, raise taxes for dedicated to purpose of home demolition. Only 3% of the listeners think that. Thank you, Jesus, for making them so smart. Pass a new levy to fight blight. Only 7%, and that's surprisingly high, I think, say that. Temporary cessation of the 1% for art fund. 23% of you say that, and I think that, along with the repeal law allowing borrowing from the CIP, which is, I couldn't figure out how to word it because we're not really borrowing the money because we never pay it back. 50% of you say that. And finally, open more pools and paint more murals. 17% of you, with your tongue firmly planted in your cheek, said that's what we should do to fight blight. Thank you so much. EconCat88 is in the studio with us about, a little less than a year ago, actually. The first article I could find was from December and November of 2013, when the Blade first decided that we need to go after a guy who's making YouTube videos that nobody would see unless we point them out. And so they tracked down a bunch of videos on YouTube, blasted EconCat88 for pointing out Toledo. In fact, the headline, that very first article, was Trashing Toledo, one negative video at a time. And then, of course, the following day, they did a story, and that one critic continues to show seedier sides of Toledo. They blasted him again for showing the blighted areas. And then, of course, Keith Burris got up on his very, very high horse. I think he needs a ladder to get on it sometimes. Got up on his horse and said, listen, you really need to come out. How about coming out and having coffee with me and, put your name on this stuff. Stop hiding in the shadows. If you're not even willing to state your name, why should anyone take you seriously? Of course, my question that day was, that's a really good question. So why not identify the people who are writing the editorials in the Toledo Blade? Okay, no answer yet from them? All right. Econ's in the studio with us. How are you this morning?
I'm pretty good, Fred. Thanks for having me.
How about your reaction, first of all, and we'll get to the current stuff. What was your reaction when they started to go after you like this for posting YouTube videos?
I was a bit shocked that they put that much effort into it, putting it on the front page of a Sunday paper and just blasting me personally. It was like they just didn't want to discuss the story itself, which now, of course, they do. It's in the front page again. They've turned
it's
code
a special report.
Yeah, true. With me, it was trashing Toledo one video at a time. I'm the one that put the boards on the homes. I'm the one that planted all the grass around town that's now 8 feet high. And
well, I thought what was interesting is that as part of their special report, they have videos, they have photographs, they talk to neighbors. The only thing they didn't do was what you did, which was ride around and make your own comments, And, I mean, everything else they did. They showed the blight. They talked about the blight. They decry the blight. And the only other thing they did was talk to Finkbeiner, Ford, and city council people. You've never done that, right?
I've spoken to city council people. Actually, 2 years ago, he didn't know I was EconCat88 at the time, but Stephen Flagg introduced me to Tom Winooski when the Parks levy was being
I remember
floated.
That, yeah.
And Steve invited Tom to ride with Steve and I around town and show him just how many parks we had. But again, Tom did not at the time know I was EconCat88, and we were not recording any footage or anything, but I had already uploaded 10 or 12 videos telling people that they should vote against that levy. And thankfully it did fail. But yeah, Tom is really... There may be others, and if there are, people can call in and name them, or you can name them. Anyone here in the studio can name them. Tom Winooski is probably the only person elected official in Toledo that really gets it.
Well, and I think that shows by his comment from yesterday is that, look, if people don't like blight, go out and buy a can of paint, and paint your own house. Sometimes it's as simple as that. I know it's not always that simple. I drive down Detroit and through other parts of the city on a regular basis, as I'm sure you do. There are a lot of homes that are ready to get knocked down. There are a lot of homes that are boarded up. Plywood is probably the biggest seller in the city of Toledo at this point. So the Blade comes after you. That was, November and January. So now it's only 6 months later, and they're doing basically your story. They don't mention you, of course, in any of the recent articles or anything, and I know that's probably not important to you whether or not they do, but do you feel at all vindicated in your coverage?
Yes, I do, actually, because as I mentioned to Burris and some of these other, I actually narrated some videos to them because they kept wanting me to talk with them, and I said, I don't really need to speak with you. I can speak here. I'm here, so here's what I have to say in response. And the videos have never been about me. It's about raising awareness. It's about letting people know what I think and what the market thinks are the real causes of these problems in the city. And everyone says, well, you don't have any solutions, maybe because they weren't the solutions they had in mind, but I've given plenty of solutions, and I'll give a few more today along with you.
Yeah, let me hear. What are some of your solutions?
Well, I think first and foremost, we have to, I believe that the reason why this is being brought back into the limelight is they need more money. They've already stolen tens of millions of dollars from the CIP fund. Now, the CIP fund is not used for blight removal, that sort of thing, but it's still a pool of money. And I just think that politicians are always looking for more money because they can buy votes, they can buy patronage. Jack Ford has mentioned the Blight Authority.
Yeah.
I think we should call it a Blight Czar.
I'm willing to go along with that. Yeah.
I'm curious to see which retread politician comes back out of the limelight. They bring up Cardi all the time. Maybe Cardi should be the Blight Czar.
Well, it won't be Jack, because he wants Edna Brown's seat, which explains why yesterday at the press conference he said that the Blade article is a call to arms, and thank God for the Blade for printing this article. So he'll get the Blade endorsement against Edna. Finkbeiner is probably a good call because they do go back to him all the time. And he did have, and they mentioned in their article earlier, the Dirty Dozen that he used to name every year. And he did go out and cut lawns, and he did target certain neighborhoods. Because I watched him one day. They went out and tore down a house, and then they went into the neighborhood. They cut all the trees. They cut all the bushes. They cleaned up, and then they left. And then 3 weeks later, it was back to what it was like. So, yeah, he's probably a good pick for a czar. But the problem is, and you and I spoke about this on the phone, that might work short term. But you have an idea of where the money, of what might happen to that authority, so to speak, in the long run, right?
Yeah, it'll be floated probably initially as a temporary tax, like our three-quarter tax. It's now, 34 years old or something like that.
34 years now, yeah.
And I think that the high local taxes here are what have caused part of these problems. So everyone likes to slam landlords and things like that. Look, there's always going to be some people that are renters, whether by choice or by force.
Right.
And I don't think we should be villainizing people that have capital, that are willing to invest in the city. Now, that doesn't mean you can just buy a house and leave the windows, curtains flowing out, and no one lives there, or a half-burned-out house, or you have to take care of the lawn. And there's limits to it. I'm also afraid, Fred, that now that they're talking about enforcement, that since they're possibly going to lose their red light camera revenues, that this might be a new source of revenue, and they're going to go around town and say, oh, well, your grass is a half inch too tall, or you haven't mowed your lawn, even though it hasn't rained in a month, you haven't mowed your lawn. Yeah. I'm afraid it's going to be like I don't want to see it become a money grab, and then they're going to try to float a levy. I like what the Blade is doing now with putting the spotlight on this. And I hope that their intentions are good. But I'm skeptical. Because
I am too. Because number one, they just announced that they're losing 130 jobs. They're cutting 130 jobs. They're shutting down their production facility. And talking with people, one of the things that's been floated is this their way of saying, look, there's a reason that we're leaving. There's a reason that we're shutting down the production facility. Things really are this bad. And we can't stay here, and that kind of covers it up, because the big story was the fact they were going to tear down. Well, all of a sudden now the focus is on the Blight instead of on the Blade. So they're taking some of the spotlight off of themselves and putting it on the rest of the city. But that's a problem that's been there for 15 to 20 years.
Yeah, there is some. It's people should always be skeptical of any time a politician gets on a platform. Literally, I think the only two city council people that haven't been quoted or got a photo op on these recent Blight articles are Larry Sykes, who probably doesn't want to be in the paper right now.
Yeah, well, he was at the press conference yesterday with Jack.
Yeah. And I haven't seen Matt Cherry quoted or anything like that.
No, I haven't seen him. I haven't seen him quoted yet, but I'm sure they'll get around to it.
Yeah, I don't want to make this a fight with the Blade necessarily, because obviously they have a lot more influence than just a regular citizen like me, but just to focus on Burris himself.
Mm-hmm.
And the column he wrote yesterday, he said something about we need new ideas.
Right.
But yet he quoted, or he mentioned consulting two gentlemen that have watched. It pretty much fell apart on their watch.
They're the ones who were responsible for it.
Let's get some new ideas with new people at the table who aren't necessarily elected or people that got into their positions because of patronage or cronyism or anything like that. Let's get some actual people with capital, with ideas.
And that's what I'd like to see happen. We've said for a long time here, well, for 8 years now on this show, that the one thing that will turn this around, and Jack Ford disagrees with me at his press conference yesterday, and so do some other people. They believe that we need to get people in the homes first, and I've seen that from Jack, and I've seen it on Toledo Talk, one of the local blog sites. We need to get people in here first and then worry about the jobs. That's not how it works. You can't put people in homes and hope that they're able to afford them and be able to maintain them if they don't have a job. Putting a person in a home doesn't do anything. It adds bills to what they're already burdened with. Yeah, and the new ideas, the fresh ideas from Keith Burris include immigration. Let's bring more immigrants into the city. I don't have a problem with bringing intelligent, hardworking guys with jobs who are going to do maybe research and development into the city. But just making us a safe haven doesn't do anything to solve the blight problem. It's not. It doesn't do a thing. It puts people in homes that are already dilapidated, if it does anything. And then he wants us to convince people to move downtown. Well, I don't know how that helps the neighborhoods. Explain that to me, Mr. Burris. How does helping people move downtown help the neighborhood? It doesn't. It builds downtown. It doesn't build the neighborhood at all. I just don't understand it. Are you worried at all about where the money's going to end up sooner or later?
Where the money for the blight removal or things?
Let's say we get it. Let's say for some reason we convince the low information voter that, we need a levy or we need new funds.
Yeah, you might as well just flush the toilet down further. It's just further the predatory taxes that we've put on property and business here locally. That's what's caused the problem, folks. If you subsidize poverty, you're going to get more poverty. And the people that are in charge and that have been in charge, we don't really need to look to them for the solutions. We need to. They helped cause these problems. They're not the cause, but it happened under their watch, and they're elected officials. They're here to lead the city, and the leadership regarding blight, while I've seen it has improved in the last few years. It's still subpar. If you look at some of my videos from back in 2010 in North Toledo and then drive through North Toledo today, you can see that the city has torn down a lot of homes that were just too far gone. They were never going to be livable again. And as far as the immigrants with Keith Burris.
Well, hold that thought for just a second. EconCat88 is in the studio with us. We're talking about blight. And what can be done about it. We both agree that this blight authority idea that Jack Ford is going to try and push through council today and next week and try to get it done in 2 weeks is a bad move, because it's just a bad move. We have rules and regulations in place. Let's enforce what we have. That's all it really takes. Enforce what you have. You don't need a blight authority or a blight czar. That's ridiculous. And as I mentioned yesterday, and we were just talking about this off air, this whole idea about murals, you've lived in Toledo all your life. You've seen the murals on Broadway. You've probably seen the murals up on Macomber and some other places. They're painting some now on the east side. What are your thoughts on the kind of money that, Lindsay Webb says we need $250,000 for murals?
Yeah, I don't mind if they spend $250,000 on murals. I just don't think it should come from the city's tax coffers, and they shouldn't be taking money that should be used for blight removal itself. Actual cutting of grass, tearing down these buildings that are just too far gone. And we're not in a prosperous time now. We're probably not going to be anytime soon. And I really don't even want to hear anything else that Lindsay Webb has to say about this, because she was one of the ones that floated that Parks levy, which was another money grab. And I just think that this whole Blight Authority is the first step towards them asking for more money, and I think it's going to be a large pool of money. They're going to use it as a jobs bill. They're going to tout it as save our city, and the special interests are going to get behind it, and I'm afraid that the Blight is going to get behind it as well. I like what they're doing with showing the Blight and putting it back in the spotlight, but I'm just afraid with their history that they're going to help tout this levy, and which is just going to further drive the city into the ground, and I just don't want to see that.
Yeah. Let me ask you one last thing, and I got to let you go. Richard Mayer is going to be on with us after the newscast. Lindsay and some of the other council people use the parks levy, the murals, the swimming pools as quality of life issues. You grew up here. How does that affect what is quality of life to a lifelong Toledoan?
My grandfather moved here in the early 50s from down south, and a lot of the older listeners can relate to this. He told me it took him 3 weeks to find an apartment here when he first got here. He had to live with other family members, slept on the couch, and then after he found a place up here, after 3 weeks, he went back and got the rest of his family, my mother and their siblings. And he told me that quality of life is money in your pocket, having a job, and you can't legislate that. It's capital has to be respected, capital has to be nurtured, and as long as we're going to continue down the path that we have, I just don't see anything changing, and hopefully this Blade series can help raise awareness, and alternative forms of media such as WSPD, my YouTube page, like you mentioned, ToledoTalk.com. There's some good discussion that goes on there. He ripped Burris yesterday. JR, the head guy, the guy that owns that blog or site, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, I don't want to see any further taxes result from this. We've been paying for this, folks.
Yeah, the money's there. We've already paid for it. They're just wasting it, as they have for years and as we've talked about for years. Let's make arrangements to have you back on maybe in a week or so, a couple of weeks once this thing moves through council, and we'll talk again, all right? Thanks a lot for the time. This will be podcast later. If you missed any of it, be sure to send a copy by email to The Blade at theblade.com.